Welcome back to Breaking Bullying. This week, we're going to talk with a guy who is frustrated with his children's education system. So I'm going to hit that music and get started. Joining me this week is Mr. James. Mr. James, how are you today?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you?
I'm doing great. So, Mr. James, you run a program called includEDucation. How
Yeah.
did that program start?
Well, it started because, well, I, I, as you mentioned in the intro, I have three older boys, so they're adults now. But the experience that they had in school was not a positive one, and I looked back on my own experiences in school and realized it wasn't much different than theirs. And I had said for the longest time, it's not as hard as what they're making it seem. Well, it can't be that hard. And so finally, uh, circumstances at the time, I was looking at a career change, and it was time to put up or shut up. Time to get in there and either do something about it or stop saying I could. And so I decided to do it. Jumped in, and originally with the intent to go into the traditional education classroom with the school districts and so on, and make the changes from within. But I quickly realized that that wasn't going to happen as I had a dual major in elementary education and special education. And I realized maybe it was my age going in, having life experience, and then also having children already, some of them with special needs, that I realized that they weren't teaching me anything new. And if they weren't teaching me something new, then they really weren't preparing the next generation of teachers. And I quickly realized that within that system, I wasn't going to be able to make the impact I wanted to. In fact, my sister, who is a public school teacher and has been now for well over 20 years, she warned me right off up front. She said, "You're going to hate it and you're not going to last." She said, she said, if everything you think you're going to do, they're not going to let you do. And so, as I was going to school, I uh, stumbled upon kind of by accident a program with where they were doing homeschool programs. So it was set up at a church, and group had set up just a few classes there that where those kids were getting together, socializing, having a good time, learning. And once I got in there, I said, hey, I want to teach. I want to do something here. And so started teaching a couple classes. Within a few weeks, I was just like, I'm all in. Life savings, everything into this. And I developed, it's like, well, we're going to do a STEM program. And with the primary market being homeschoolers, but we do after school programs for public schools and stuff as well, camps and so on. But the vast majority of our students, which just even this last semester, we were well over 1,000 students, were homeschoolers. So 95% of those are homeschool students, and it's a whole different world. And of course, as has gone on, we've expanded our programs, so we offer all sorts of things, everything from video game design, robotics, hands-on science and engineering programs, 3D printing, cooking, sewing, life skills classes. Uh, yeah, I mean, I could go on and on. We have so many options available, and all of these homeschoolers get to take advantage of it.
That's awesome. Besides the your kids not learning anything new from what you learned when you were younger, was there any other issues that you didn't like how the public school system was doing?
Yes, mainly it was a lot of it was bullying, and it's uh, I have some I would say from the traditional public school realm, and for people who haven't experienced it themselves, which should be probably some unpopular opinions when it comes to this, but they faced bullying not only from their peers, but unfortunately, I found out many times the worst bullies of all were some of the teachers,
Really?
and they kind of perpetuated that environment within the school system itself because the teachers were just as bad, if not worse, in some cases than the other students.
What were the teachers doing?
Little things like for instance, my son would do his schoolwork, and because he didn't learn the way they were teaching him in class, he comes home with his homework, right? And you got kids, you work with their homework, and you don't know how the teacher taught it in the class, so it's a math. So you're like, okay, well, I know how to
Oh
do
gosh.
math, so you show him how to do the math, right? He knew how to do it, how to get the answer, but he said that's not the way she said to do it in class. Well, I don't know the way she said to do it in class, so this is the way I can help you. So then when he's there the next day, she's going to use that in front of the class as an example, and like how he did it wrong, and like call him out on it in front of the class for it. And it was like, why would you do that? First off, like, why would you ever do that? And second, uh, why would it be a bad thing the way he did it?
No kidding.
And so it led to a conference, and we had the principal there, and I just asked, I said, what's wrong with him doing it this way, first off? And she said, well, that's not the way I taught him in class. I said, well, first off, I got to correct you on some of your terminology. That you may have shown him how to do it a certain way in class or demonstrated it. Said, but the word taught implies learned, and he didn't, so you didn't. So when I taught him how to do it, he did learn it, and that's the way he demonstrated to do it. So I said, first off, you need to grade him on the way he actually was taught, and since you didn't do the teaching, this is the way it was. And I said, a second, why would he be called out in front of the class when it wasn't that he did anything incorrect on it? Which even if he had, why would you call him out in the middle of the
Exactly.
class like that? So it was little things like that, or my oldest son is on the spectrum and has, which is often times accompanies with that is, like a tic disorder, right? So stimming, and so he would have those random hand movements and stuff, and he was by even some of the teachers would ask him to leave the classroom because he was being distracting, and it's not something he can control. It's like blinking. We can't control whether we blink or not. And the harder we try to not blink, the more we end up blinking to catch up, you know?
Yeah.
So if you try to not to blink for a while, all of a sudden you're blink, 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 blink to catch up with it. And so uh, it was, yeah, he'd be called out in front of the class over something he doesn't want to be noticed for anyway. And it was just little things like that. And just the excuses that would come with it. Well, he's being distracting.
It wasn't little things. I mean, to a kid, that's a big deal, especially with the blinking, to get
Right.
that pointed out in front of the whole class because now that a certain kid knows, like, watch that kid, he blinks a lot. They're gonna now realize that. Um,
Yeah. So it was pointing out those things, or, my other son with ADHD, having a hard time focusing and being like, oh, you're not paying attention again. But, well, yeah, he has an IEP. You like, why would you put it like that in front of him? Like the little passive aggressive type bullying things that they would do, um, with the cheery voice to accompany it, as
yeah,
if putting sugar on it made it so it didn't sting as much,
exactly.
you know? And so it was that kind of thing. And it was that kind of stuff. I'm like, it turns kids off to education, like, because they don't feel like they could trust the teacher, and the other students, they join in, plus, the other things other kids do and stuff. And so it was, luckily not a lot of physical bullying, although there was some of that as well. But it was just a lot of that bullying that would go on. That was, to me, seemed to be start from the top down, and trickle down bullying, I guess you would say,
Yeah,
and stuff. But even the physical stuff and the way the school handled it, I just was not happy with.
yeah. First of all, I hate how they teach math these days, or at least a few years ago when my daughter, when I saw her math problems, I was like, this weird. They did. I don't even know how to explain it.
Well, it was kind of weird because, I get in theory why they're trying to do some of it. And that's, every kid has their own unique learning style, things that they may pick up on. And for some kids, doing it those ways that we might look at and say that's weird could potentially benefit some of those kids. But my problem with it was uh, they're they make them learn every single way to do it. And once the kids found the way that works for them, let them do it that way.
Exactly.
Once you switch it again, you're just creating confusion because now you've like reconfused them and like, okay, the way I was doing it, I can't do it that way. I have to do it this way. This doesn't make sense. And so something where they were like, they had that aha moment. Oh, I get it. And then you just took it away. Like, no, let it once they it's okay to teach different strategies. That's fine. But once they found the strategy that works for them, let them use it. For goodness sake, just let them use that strategy. It works. Let them use it and stuff. And yeah, a lot of it's way too rigid on we have to use this particular method that ultimately isn't going to help them later on. I mean, one of the nice things about the way we learned math, very straightforward, is because it works later on too. And it just, you just, it naturally, the other math later on builds off of that, where some of these other ways it doesn't. So they might have learned it this way for this, for adding and subtracting or multiplying. But now once you start getting into fractions, you start getting into algebra, well, all that stuff, oh, you can't use that anymore. It's gone. Well, now there's how are they supposed to learn now when you took away their whole foundation that you showed them how to do?
Was that the
You
teacher's choice or is that the school district's policy?
unfortunately, a lot of it's is the school district policy.
Okay.
So working with a lot of teachers, I've learned that many of them go in with these great ideals. Like they want to go in, we want to change the world, we want to help these kids, and they want to do things the right way, and treat all these kids with respect. And so, but a lot of that stuff gets knocked out of them. Like you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to do it on this schedule. One of the things that I did when I was, because as I was going to school, because like I said, I went late to to the game and to the education field. My sister was already teaching, for several years, and so as you're going to go into school, you got to do your observation hours, right? And I was able to do that in her classroom. And some of the things that she told me that she has to do, quite frankly, I almost didn't believe it. When she said, "Look, once it's 1:15, math time is over, and now we're doing reading," just as an example. Like, it doesn't matter that we're right in the middle of something. It's time to move on. We have to stop that and move to the next section. I'm like, that's ridiculous. But she wasn't kidding. While I was in there, the school sent some sort of administrator in there with this tablet to stand in the middle, like in the back of the room, watching, keeping an eye on the time and making notes. This happened 3 or 4 times a day, checking up on her. The whole demeanor in the classroom changed. Her demeanor changed. The students changed. It was like a cloud had descended in, and just like it was uncomfortable. All of a sudden, I was uncomfortable being even in there watching. I'm like, this is really just awkward and weird because this person is sitting there like judging the class
Yeah.
and then leaves after 5 or 10 minutes. And it's several times a day. And I'm like, that was crazy. What was that? She told me later, and it's them making sure that she went from one lesson and moved into the next one. So they're being told exactly. The teacher's not allowed to use like any experience. They're not allowed to use thought of their own. Like, hey, I know we need to, kids are struggling with math. Maybe we should spend an extra 15 minutes on math today. Nope. That clock hit. You got to move on. And I'm like, that is just nuts to me.
Yeah. And going back to the bullying part, when you had a conversation with the teacher about why she had to let the whole class know, what was her response?
Her response was just that she was trying to demonstrate to the kids that they have to do it a certain way, and he hadn't done it the right way. And like there was in her mind a justification for it. And I said,
But that's like public shaming.
right. That's what I said. I said, you're calling him out as though he did something wrong. I said, if you had told him, like, I really want it this way, and had a private conversation with him and then shown him how to do it, that might have been different. But to in front of the class and hold his paper up like in a jovial, like I'm joking around manner, like, look, this is what we don't do type of thing. Isn't that right, Matt? Like what? Why would you do like to me that was just it's very demeaning and it's not putting the spotlight on someone in a positive way.
No.
And that should be the only time we put a student in the spotlight is when it's as a positive, like build them up. And uh, but the bigger issue than that was because anybody can make a mistake. But then when the principal's sitting there, like, I really don't see where there's an issue. And I'm like,
You
are
kidding?
you are you just saying that because you have to say that you guys don't want to, you know, like admit that you may have done something wrong, or do you really believe there was nothing wrong with that at all? And that's what got me. It was just like the not wanting to have any sort. It was, I mean, to me, either way, it's just as bad. Whether if you don't see how that's wrong, or it's just, well, we can't admit it, so we don't want to take any accountability for it. Either way, it's bad.
And for a kid having a teacher pick on them, it's even worse. There's no one else to turn to at this point now. You kinda lost all hope.
Yeah,
That's
right.
horrible.
And it's well, and it puts just a negative, uh, like a negative feeling towards learning. So unfortunately, all three of my adult boys, not a single one of they never continued on after high school.
How many people are leaving the public school system due to bullying and joining your program?
A lot. We have, even if it wasn't their primary reason, it was one of the reasons, right? Because there's always going to be that one, the straw that broke the camel's back. And a lot of times they've been seeing their child struggle in a few different ways, whether it's they're falling further and further behind, or why is my child being moved along? I don't feel like they're where they should be. But a lot of times that straw is a bullying situation. So there was some sort of a bullying situation, and the school did not handle it appropriately, or at least not to the parent's satisfaction. And so uh, that's what will be that trigger moment that they're like, okay, we're pulling the trigger, we're pulling them out, and now we got to figure something out. And so we do get a lot of parents coming in that way, and they ask, and I can always tell because that's one of the first thing they ask is they'll ask when they're asking about the program is, uh, you know, how do the kids treat each other? What's the environment? And even if they kind of skirt around using the word bullying, I finally get it out of them. Yes, they're worried about bullying in you know, in our learning environment. And that's one of the things that's actually one of the things I'm most proud of, and that I learned very early on when I had first started working with homeschoolers. And that is the bullying. It I don't want to say it doesn't exist, but it almost doesn't exist because it's such a different type of environment, and they're the students themselves are already taking a little bit more responsibility for their own education just by default because you're homeschooling, and they take it a little bit more seriously that they're there to learn when they do go places, and they're happy to be going places where they can follow their interests. And so the way we handle it too is very different. So I can, and we have our terms and conditions that everybody has to agree to when they sign up for a class. And with the way we handle it, for instance, even a student turns to another and says, "Oh, that's stupid," because it was an idea that was shared. They're like, "That was a stupid idea." Whoa, 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 hold up. First off, we're not going to talk to other people that way. We're going to value all ideas. And I said, but we don't talk to people that way. I said, so you know that that's not what we're about. We're not going to do it that way. If you do it again, I'm going to have to call your mom, and you're going to have to explain to her why she has to pick you up right now. And that's the last thing they want to do is to have to call their mom, and their mom has to pick them up because there's a good chance their mom is out waiting in the parking lot. Yeah, she's somewhere close by, and she will be in there and will be mortified that she has to pick up her child for something like that. And they're going to hear it later. So they know they're going to get in trouble. of course, for our end, now we do have to follow up with that. And so there are times where we have to follow up with it and actually call mom. And we tell them, look, we're not, there's not always are we going to get into the details during a class because it's not necessarily something for all the other students to hear and stuff. But we can get into a, quick private conversation on the phone. This is what was said. We gave them a warning. They did it again. We do need you to come pick him up and we'll discuss it later. And then we follow up with them later. But we take it so far is as to even when a child sits there and says, and a lot of this is, because they've been told this from someone, or they just have a low self esteem. And I'll hear all the time, oh, yeah, or not all the time, but occasionally you say, oh, they messed up on something, they did something wrong. And I'm showing them how to do it. Oh, I'm so stupid. Oh, whoa, hold up now. You're not stupid. I said, I know that because you're in my class and stupid people can't even be here. So I already know that's not true. You're here. There's no way you're stupid. I said, did you make a mistake? Sure. We can all make mistakes. You're learning something new. If you already knew this stuff, you wouldn't be here. You'd already be doing it. You're here to learn. Of course, you're going to make mistakes. So don't say that. That's not something we're going to be saying anymore. And so even that self deprecating insult, we try to put a stop to. But for things where it goes beyond that, where it's like physical, we have a true zero tolerance for that. If a child, I mean, it's like a different if it's like a 4-year-old turning because they got frustrated and kicked their neighbor over a bucket of Legos or something. Okay, we're having a talk about why that's not appropriate and stuff. But if they're 10, 11, 12 years old and they go and they hit another kid because they got angry over something, that's it. You got to go home and you can't come back.
Wow.
And we've only had to do it twice where we've had a situation like that. But because it happened and we took care of it right away, we didn't shy behind it. We're not trying to hide it or anything. Nope, this happened. We talked to the parents, say, unfortunately, can't come back. And both times parents were upset, but that's okay.
Yeah.
And in one of the cases in particular, I really liked this kid. It was an awesome kid and I hated doing it. But we have a policy for a reason, and that's because everyone has to feel safe in that learning environment. If they don't feel safe, they're not going to do any learning.
So in your environment, it's really hard for a bully to flourish because once you see them act out inappropriately the first time, that's it. You guys are on
Yep.
it. What happens the
Yeah.
second time? Is there like another warning before they get kicked out? What's the process
If it
of that?
becomes if it becomes a pattern of like verbal bullying like that, that first time where we're just like a hey, it's kind of just like a one and done. We call them out. It may have been a slip or something, and they realize okay that happened, and it can happen here or there. Kids will just blurt something out, right? But we get it even from the simplest little thing right away. Nope, we put a stop to it. That's it. Very rarely do we actually have to call a parent to come pick them up. Yeah,
Wow.
we do that once a semester between all of our classes at our learning center, and everybody knows we mean it. And so that usually just the warning is enough. We have some students where, especially if they have ADHD, it's a little more that impulse control,
Mm.
so they may slip up. Like, that's
Yeah.
okay. We give the warning, we stop it. And then as long as they acknowledge and they're like, oh, I'm sorry, we continue. And we can let it go because it was called out, it stopped, and we're okay. If it becomes a pattern, especially if it's a uh, with intent, to
Yep.
to that there's a difference between intent and some. Oh, it was an accident, slipped out.
Yeah.
If it's a pattern with intent, then that's where we've we'll speak to the student. Usually, it's me going there, even if I'm not scheduled to be there necessarily myself. I will come because they all know Mr. James, and so I can pull the student out of the class and talk to them. And I do it delicately in a way so that it's not because I don't want to single them out and make it like, well, now we're bullying the student, right?
Yeah.
So it's a different time. Pull them out. hey, I heard that we had a situation here. What's going on with that? And talk to them. And it could be there's a reason why they're upset at that student. And usually when we talk it out, and they could see that even if they're upset with that student, is it really worth, insulting and making it a bigger issue for themselves even? And usually they understand it's not. And that talk, and it's like, look, I know you're above that. Can I count on you not to do it again? Give that fist bump. Yes, they're good. And almost every time, that's as far as it needs to go. Every so often, it'll go further. And usually this is when you're talking like older students, like they're high school level, and they just don't want to let something go. Which case now, all right, we need to talk to the parent as well. With the student and the parent together, we're talking about it, and depending on the student's attitude, we may just decide, you know what, I think this is not a good fit, because the last thing we want is for them to come in, because uh, if they are not truly remorseful for what they've done or seeing that what they did was wrong, then they're not going to change the behavior. If anything, it's likely going to escalate. And
Right.
so, you know what? We just need to remove them from the situation.
What's the student to teacher ratio at your school?
Depends on the class. So some classes we may have 4 students with one teacher. It largely just depends on enrollment and the type of class it is. Something like a reading and writing class where it's a little more uh, uh, academic, I guess, more like a core type of class. We'll do a little bit lower ratios on that so they can get a little bit more individual attention. But we have some classes where we have robotics or video game design classes where we have, 20 to 25 students in the class. I know we have some drama classes where like our cutoff is 30 because it's a performance class
That's still a lot of
and
kids
stuff.
for
It's a
one
lot of
teacher.
kids, but
Yeah.
it is, but we only do that with the teachers that we know can handle it. Like I know myself, just based on with my experience, what I could do, I may have some assistance on some things, but I've done big events where I've had 100 kids, and we're doing a engineering straw rocket project, and I have people helping to pass stuff out, but I'm leading the whole thing, and and stuff. But I know where what I could do. I wouldn't have any of my instructors do that because they're not there yet to be able to do that many. So I know which ones are a little bit stronger, which ones need the lower numbers in there to be able to keep the quality high. So it depends on the class too. So some classes we won't go that high, but also some of it's space. If it's a small classroom, we don't need everybody feeling like sardines. So we have to, we might only have we put the cap at 10. It's a small classroom. Typically, we're running out of a church. So church that has extra rooms that we can use. So we use their rooms. Some rooms are smaller than others, and we may be limited in size just by the physical space that we have available.
In your opinion, why do you think the public schools have a hard time dealing with the dealing with the bullying?
Because of money. I think that's what it comes down to. And if they had a policy where they were to remove a student because of it, for one, they'd have to remove a lot of students, and they would lose the money, the funding that comes with those students. So that's one. And two, it would mean that they have to come up with an alternate place for them to go. And if you have an alternate place for them to go, well, now you're creating more choices, which is the opposite of what they really want. And honestly, the real culprit in this is, and again, it's another unpopular view, is it's the unions. The teachers union is probably the most powerful political organization on the planet, right? They influence elections and stuff because it's teachers, right? The teachers say to do this, and everybody says, oh, well, if the teachers say I need to vote for this person, I'm going to go vote for this person. It's not the teachers, it's the union. And they and because they have that grip on education, it makes them powerful. They don't want choice. Programs like mine, they don't want to exist. They don't like that these charter schools exist, even though they're within the public school realm. The teachers are not union.
Hmm.
So It's the enemy. Now, if they would to unionize all those union teachers, if all my teachers were unionized, oh, they'd have no problem with it whatsoever. But because they're not, they are against it. So they have to take out choices. So they don't want to create choices. And that's one of the big problems. And unfortunately, the teachers unwittingly helped perpetuate the problem. Now, if you talk to a public school teacher and you ask them what are their major issues, they may mention their wages. They may mention that. But one of the main things they're going to talk about is dealing with unruly students in the classroom because they can't control their own class. And they'll say they can't control a lot of the content that they're allowed to teach in the class. They can't teach the way they want, and they can't just remove a student for who's having poor behavior in the class, right?
So does the teacher unions control the student teacher ratio as well?
Uh, yeah, to it. Well, they can. So they have fought for that, and that's where they did start lowering it. But that means this because, and they did that specifically because the school district now has to hire more union teachers. But what they won't do is they don't want to remove it. If, with all the teachers complaining about those specific issues, when has any of these teachers unions said, okay, we need to do something about these kids that are causing that are the bullies and stuff? They don't because they don't want those students removed. Because if those students are removed and go someplace else, well, that means that's less union teachers that are in the union. So the union will represent the teachers insofar as it benefits the union. If it doesn't benefit the union, they're not going to represent the teachers on that. So they'll represent the teachers on pay, and they'll represent the teachers when it comes to teacher ratios because it benefits the union. But where it doesn't benefit the union, they won't do it. And they will constantly in political commercials and stuff, they'll make it seem as though they're concerned about the kids. The teachers union couldn't care less about the kids themselves. That's not who they are there for. So if that should go in one ear and out the other, as far as when we're considering if the union says so it's this and this for the kids, well, maybe it is, maybe it is good for the kids, maybe it's not, but it has nothing to do with what they say it is because the kids are not their focus. It's on getting more union teachers in so there's more money for the union.
I truly believe teachers do want to help combat bullying, but there's like 30, 40 kids in a class, let's say. It's almost impossible to see every little detail what's going on. And I see schools like my own community, we spent millions of dollars on sports facilities, like on a football field and swimming pool, stuff that I'm never going to use. My kids are not going to use either. But we spent millions into this type of stuff. Why don't we put that money into more teachers, more classrooms, smaller size classes? I believe that will help end this bullying at least a little bit. I just don't understand why we don't do that. But we focus so much on sports. Like our town wanted a new football turf, like which is weird. Why do you want turf? Because the Minnesota Vikings they're getting rid of the turf because it causes too much injuries. But yet they wanted us to flip out $1 million for turf on public schools. Like, but that's a big concern for them. But I don't see anything in the referendums coming about we want more teachers, more social workers, more counselors to help battle the bullying issues. I don't see that ever. I
Well,
don't
I
get
think
it.
part of it is I think part of it is there's a bit of a I mean, obviously, it's a negotiation process, and while the teachers union, I think in many ways would like to have more teachers because again, that's more
Make more
influence
money.
for the union, right? There are budgetary constraints as well. Now, I think they could uh, a lot of what's budgeted for schools needs to be done differently. Schools will receive money for that's earmarked for specific things, and they can't use it for other things, and which just seems weird to me. So a lot of times they'll have this budgeting, and they may be budgeting something for sports because it makes the school look better, which means they might get more money, uh, or they need to spend it or they lose it type of thing. And instead of spending it where it would be beneficial, they may be limited where they can apply those funds. So it might be that they have to use it towards the betterment of the school grounds, for instance. Um, yeah, and I'm not going to pretend to be super educated on in that area, but I do think a lot of it too is there's only a certain amount of the budget that's allocated um, towards the teaching staff, right, for salaries and so on. And I think that too is where the 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 union is they they are careful in that they maintain a certain type of relationship with the administration. So they'll push on some things, but if you notice, like uh, the teacher wages, the teachers always complain, oh, they don't make enough. Well, it's because there's only so much of a raise they can give them versus how many teachers can be hired, because that budget doesn't necessarily change. They have that certain amount of budget, and how much they pay teachers, if they make the amount goes higher per teacher, well, that means the number of teachers has to go down too. So there is a bit of a balancing act in there. So I think the union is torn between keeping the member numbers up versus the teacher salaries, but they can't let the salaries go down too low. So I think that's where they run into an issue, is just with that budgeting. But I think that also goes to point to the mismanagement of funds for schools. Like you mentioned, school brand new football field with turf and stuff, like they don't need that. But does the music class have instruments? You know, and stuff. You know what I
Can't buy
mean?
your
It's
own.
like,
Can't buy your own instrument.
right, exactly. So it's like, why, where we put the money? And so everybody says, well, we need more money for the schools. It's not a funding problem for our schools. It's a budgeting problem for our schools, because again, we get people in there. It's just like any type of politics. You get people in there. Same thing with our government. Get people in there. Where do they spend the money? Well, they spend the money where it might be advantageous for them at some point too. And so the funding doesn't necessarily get placed where it should, which should be the primary beneficiary of any school funding should be the students. How will this where should this funding go that will have the maximum potential value for the students that are attending that school? And that's what's not happening, because those kids don't, very few kids will benefit from turf. Even if that is a benefit, you know, very few will benefit from that. But how many would benefit from other things that could be provided? Here you don't get free busing either. I don't know how it is there,
Free
but
busing
no,
here.
you have now you have to pay if you want busing. So you can only imagine drop off and pickup time at these schools, as all the parents are all coming at once to try to drop off and all coming at once to pick up. It's a nightmare, and because none of these kids no one can afford to take the busing. Well, how many people would benefit from free busing? But they don't, because they're putting the money to other things. So it's not a funding issue. The schools get plenty of money. Like, they get tons of money. And the amount of funding that they get on a per student basis, I look at that and I'm like, oh my gosh, if they gave that to me, the things I could do for these kids. But that's not their outlook when they're looking at it. And so a lot of people serving their own self interests first
Yeah.
before the kids, and I think that's and then it's just a game. Like I said, they can hire more teachers, but there's only a certain amount of budget for it, so then the teachers can't make as much, and they can only get the teachers to go down so far before the teachers are unhappy. So they do have to play a balancing act. But ultimately, yes, it would benefit to have a smaller student to teacher ratio, because they can keep a better eye on things. They can, have better interaction with the students
Well, they can get
and
that
stuff.
connection time. They can get that one-on-one connection that you can
Yes,
get with your kids. I think I found the
exactly.
name of this. I think I found the name of this podcast. Um, Bullying issues are not in our budget.
Yep. There you, and that pretty
That's
much is
it.
what it comes down to. Because they say
That's
they can't
ridiculous.
do anything, but they can. They just don't
Yeah.
want to. Yeah, and a lot of it too is just political. Do you want to? Oh, do I want to upset people and stuff like that? Come on, you have to have a backbone. Like I knew telling a family their student can't come back again, they're going to be upset. They're going to be upset at me, but it is what it is. And I put a policy in place. I got to enforce the policy, or it means nothing. And uh, you got to have the backbone to face that. Then you have to then face them and say, "This is the policy. This is what we're going to do." And a lot of people don't want to do that. They don't want to have to tell them, "Sorry, your kid can't come back."
What's
And
annoying is I would love to ask like the teachers union or somebody who has this control, like, what is a kid's life worth to you? Is it worth for one or two kids to commit suicide due to bullying? Is that okay? Because we got to put this money elsewhere. I really would like to know that answer. And that
well,
it
and
seems
that's the
like
thing.
they don't care.
It does seem that way, and I think on a personal level they do. But once
Oh,
they're
I yes, I believe it on a personal level. Like
yeah,
teachers, I'm all for them. I feel like they're just overworked and they're doing their
right,
best. I get that.
right. But even then, it's at a certain point they get to they do get there where I mean I've heard I actually saw it. I actually just saw it like voiced out recently on a Facebook post just recently, and it says the best thing a teacher can do to get to be able to survive being a teacher is to stop caring. So you have to remove your emotions from it and look at it as just a job. You're going there, it's just a job. You're there to get your money, do what they tell you to do, and get out. And you have to stop caring about the
Yeah,
students as individuals.
that doesn't
Otherwise,
work. Doesn't work for me. I wouldn't even
right,
hire
it
an
doesn't work for
employee
me
that way.
either. And I think that's what my sister was trying to tell me is that it wasn't going to work for me because she knew how I would be about it. And but you and I get where they're coming from on it because if they can't do anything about it and they care, they're just going to drive themselves crazy. So they have to detach. And what a sad system that is that a teacher has to detach just to be able to do their job. And you shouldn't have to. I I
Because
care about my students and every single one of them and you know and they can they feel that like they feel that connection.
yeah, people don't go to school to become teachers to become rich. They already know that going to college, they're not going to become rich. They go into it because they love kids. And the fact that they have to go to these schools and get treated as such, they don't get much money. Other programs like sports are getting way more funds than they're getting. And they're being told, or not really being told, like, hey, don't care, but they're pretty much are saying, well, not your problem. Don't worry about it. Move on.
Right.
Subliminally, they're being told that.
Well, right. Well, and you made a good point. When they go in, it's no mystery what teachers make. Anybody can look it up with a quick Google search and see what average teacher salary is in any given area. Yet they go into it because majority of them get into it because, well, they want to make a difference. They want to feel good about what they're doing, and it's not about the money. But as you look as time goes on, how many times do you see where teachers are posting, yeah, I don't make enough money. I don't, it all of a sudden it becomes about the money is because it's turned into a job rather than a passion for them.
Well, if you have to go to school or go to work every day and get chewed out by a third grader to disrespect you, like one thing I can't handle disrespect, especially from kids, an adult. I could never get away with that when I was a kid. And
Mm,
now these days, like the new age parents, I don't want to bash on them, but I'm sorry, these new age parents, some of them don't know how to parent at all. That's sorry, that's just what it
Unfortunately,
is. And
unfortunately, yeah,
your kids are little shitheads, and they're making teachers' lives miserable, which they're causing them to quit, find new jobs. I mean, crap, a lot of them go to work at Walmart because Walmart pays more money than, than the school does. At least at Walmart, they're not gonna get yelled at by little kids. At least they go to Walmart and they can see people acting stupid and they can film it if they want.
right.
It's so stupid. It's it's the parents too on this, and they but
Yeah,
when it's a bullying issue, it's always the school's fault. It's the school's fault, school's fault, school's fault. Like, let's look at your kid. Let's look at your okay, the kid is
yeah.
a jerk. How about the parent? The parent's worse.
Yes. And I will say, if someone is looking for an alternative, like there, and every state's going to be different. I can only speak to, California and the resources here, but there are so many resources that homeschooling is a very viable option, and it's never been easier for someone to homeschool and get um, a great experience from it, and not feeling like you're just all alone trying to figure it out. There's so many resources to help, and if you're concerned about bullying, it's a whole different world. By default, like I said, we don't have very many issues. But then again, by default, if you're homeschooling, you are already automatically more involved in your kid's life and in their education and their social experience. So you're already a better parent. Just from that experience, you're going to be a better parent. And so the parents step up more too. Like they would be mortified. They hear their student was disrespectful to the instructor or to another kid, and they're like, "What?" They're turning to the kid, "You did what?" Rather than, "Well, how did that happen?" Looking at the instructor. It is a different mindset from the parents too. So it's a whole different type of community. And actually, what made me fell in love with the whole thing too, and where I was like, I'm all in. This is where, because I saw it. I said, this is where education is going to change and it's going to evolve. But I do think it points to there needs to be choices. And the more choices we have available, the better it is for everyone. And it's better for the kids, it's better for the parents, and it's better for the teachers too. The teachers shouldn't be stuck to one place to work because they have no other options any more than the students should be stuck going to a school because there are no other options.
I'm not sure if you saw
It's
this meme on Facebook, but it was a meme about if we treated teachers like NFL players. So
right.
every year we had the teacher draft. Like, I want this teacher for science because this science teacher, their kids all got A's, whatever. I don't know. But if we treated our teachers like athletes, have much better education too.
We would. We would. Yeah, I think a lot of it is too is just letting. I think we need more choice for the teachers. That way they can teach more what they're passionate about and the way they want to teach. And then the institution that employs them is hiring them because of those strengths that they are bringing, because they want the way they teach. And if they're not teaching the right way, then no one hires them. And they'll have to adapt
Yeah,
and learn a different way. And we'll have better teachers because of it. Um, and I know there's people who are against, like, choices that, they're against choice, and the argument's made, well, you'll have public schools closing. Good. uh, Good. If they're not performing, they should close. If
yep.
they're lost all their students to other choices, then they weren't doing the job.
Going
Choice is the ultimate accountability. Yeah, I know in my classes, if we're not doing a good job, someone's going to go someplace else. It should be the same thing with any, and you raise the bar for everyone. The school administrators need to do better. Otherwise,
oh,
the school numbers are going to be down and they're going to be looking for another job. So they have to keep their teachers happy. So the teachers are performing better in the classroom. So the students are getting a better experience and the education is better. And now families want to stay there. No one would be going anywhere else if they were getting what they needed at that public school level.
going back to your it was your son being bullied by a teacher. Do you think that teacher was just burnt out? They just stopped
I,
giving.
I think so. I think burnt out, and I think as well. Um, I know just from my own personal experience being in school, I always saw the teacher there. There was always like those few teachers that were popular amongst a certain group. Like the popular kids at school had these teachers that they really liked because they were the popular, because those teachers catered to the popular kids. They became, because they wanted to feel like they belonged to the popular kids group too. And so sometimes it's a little bit of that too. And so in a weird way, like the teacher succumbing to a little bit of peer pressure. Like the teacher wants to look cool,
Yeah.
and sometimes that's at the expense of a student. And I think it's just them not thinking about it, but it just, I think, goes to poor coaching. But also, in many cases, I I think it also speaks to a lack of life experience. And I think one of the things that has made me a great instructor, and I'm going to brag a little bit and say I am an amazing teacher. I am awesome. And whenever I'm personally teaching a class, like those are going to have the highest numbers because we're like, oh, we want Mr. James in particular. And it's because, and I think what made me a good teacher is my life experience. I have experience raising kids. I had experience in sales and management. I had to manage a team. I had to sell things. I had to learn how to present material in a fun and engaging way to hold my audience so they'd buy it. Right. Same thing in the classroom. Um, I had to see the poor experiences to realize how it needed to be done better. And I fully recognize that if I had left high school and had gone right to college and had gone into teaching in my early 20s, I would have sucked just as bad as any of these other teachers because I wouldn't have had the perspective needed that I have now. I would have been a completely different teacher. I probably would have been just as bad as the rest of them and doing all the things that I criticized about my kids' teachers. And because I would have been in that culture. And I think it's a bit of a culture too. But we're asking kids, many times, and this is maybe not fair, um, to right out of high school, you got to go to college. What are you going to do for the rest of your life? How the hell does an 18-year-old know what they want to do for the rest of their life? And so they go and they get this degree, and even if they don't enjoy it, like if you've gone, 4, 6, 8 years, whatever it is for schooling that you did to become a teacher, and now you've been doing it for 4 years and you hate it, are you leaving? No, because you're still paying off those student loans that you got just to get to become a teacher. So you're going to stick with it, even though it's really not your cup of tea. You're going to stick with it because that's your job. It's not your passion anymore. It's your job, and that's what you're going to do. Instead, I think we need to change things around a little bit. And I, having gone through, and I can honestly say, going to college again, dual major in elementary education and special education. If I can, and I honestly feel this way, if I can honestly say that doing that, and it was again accountable to because of my experience as a parent and just life experience in general, I can honestly say it didn't teach me anything new. In many cases, I found I was correcting the instructor who's teaching us how we're going to do IEP meetings and has never been in an IEP meeting. Well, you have no idea how that goes from the parent side of it.
Yeah.
So you can't teach me how it's going to happen in there because I know how it's going to happen in there. And I'm now teaching the class, this is what really happens in an IEP meeting. And this is how the parent feels going in. And if you don't have people who can give that perspective, well, then how does the teacher know? They can only go by what they're being taught, and they're really not being taught anything. Honestly, nothing profound out of that has helped me in the classroom. Most of it is like, okay, dismiss all that, and it's working. And so I think a lot of it too is that we need to change what the qualifications are for teaching. My teachers, you have to be good with kids. I have to see that you're good with kids, and you have to have some knowledge that you can impart on them enthusiastically. That's it. You don't
Yep.
need some special credential or anything like that. And my teachers, I'll put them up against any teacher out there. They're amazing at what they teach. They're amazing at it. And that's what we need more of in education, but that's going to come from people who have experience. You know, I have a teacher that can teach you all about the American Railway, the history of the American Railway, because that's his passion. He's worked for a railway museum, and he wants to teach this class. Oh my gosh, the kids love that class because he loves it. You can't get that from sending someone right out of high school, go to college, and then come out and expect you to throw them in a classroom that they're not prepared for. So I think we set them up for failure right from the beginning
Yeah.
because it's right out of high school, become a student, you got no real world experience anywhere, aside maybe a part-time job while you were going to college, and now we're going to teach these kids how to be worldly when you're not yourself. Like that to me, we're setting the teachers up to fail.
I teach a martial arts school, and my instructor is not a black belt. She's a green belt, but she has a 4-year degree in early elementary education from a prestigious school. She's a school teacher by day. She teaches
Mm,
for me at night. And I hired her because she's a school teacher. She knows how to work with kids. A black belt doesn't make you a teacher. I've
right.
seen many black belts who are horrible working with kids. And I'm the only school in my town that does things that's not the way you're supposed to do it in the martial arts realm, because we might be called a McDojo. But before I joined this program called Skills, I used to have to teach, I taught ITF Taekwondo, forms, one steps, uh, blocking routine, kicking routine, uh, sparring, all this stuff that we had cramming the kids in like 12 weeks for the first year. Every 12 weeks we test out and then it gets longer. But kids had to learn it this way. When I went to go study childhood education, and I got a certificate in that, and you start teaching the way kids learn, now things get a little bit more easier in class. The kids that are in my school now that might have been tough for somebody else, they're growing so much better in my school because I just teach a way which they can learn. A lot of kids learn kinesthetically. So I tell parents, I'm not giving them the answers that they can perform a proper round kick by me just showing them how to do a round kick. They knew how to do the round kick. They just couldn't put the word and the action together just yet. They didn't understand that part. So if I say round kick, show them round kick, that clicks in their head, they can do a perfect round kick for what's expected for their level. And when you start teaching that way, it makes a world of a difference. And
Yep.
especially when you have a
It
teacher that can just love working with kids.
Right. Like you said, a green belt could teach, and but a black belt doesn't necessarily mean they can teach. And it's the same. It's the same exact thing. You find people who can. You got to find the teachers and put them in there. I'm going to be honest. I teach science classes all the time. The extent of my science knowledge is what is in that lesson. That's it. I get. I shouldn't say. It's a little bit more than that. If they ask questions, I get it. But if there's something I don't know, I'll tell them. I'll say, that's a darn good question. I'm not sure. Let's look it up. Let's find out.
Yeah.
It will make it part of the class. I'll look it up because it's okay for me to say I don't know something, and we can look it up and find the answer. I could teach video game design using the software that I use and making the video games that we're going to make in the class. You know, the capabilities are much farther than that, but mine are not. So I teach what I'm capable of teaching in that classroom, and I just do it very, very well. You know, uh, robotics. Elon Musk is going to know a lot more about robotics than I do, but I can teach it to a beginner much better than he can. I don't know that he'd be a great teacher, you know, especially for
Right.
kids, but I can be. And so I think that's where I think we need to redefine and what makes a teacher and stuff. I think that would go a long way towards it, and also just and then giving the teachers some freedom to do their thing. I need my hyben instructor wants to do a new program, and it's something I'm not familiar with, and they just got to show me like, okay, show me what do you plan on doing. Okay, looks like a solid plan. Okay, I've seen them work with kids assisting in other classes. Okay, let's do it. And so we try it out, and either I give them pointers on how to deal with how to deal with situations and stuff in the classroom as they come up, or hey, I think we need to redo this stuff. Maybe this is a little too advanced. We need to scale it down a little bit, or I think you need to challenge them a little bit more. And so we'll talk about it, and they'll adjust. But largely, that's your subject. You teach the kids. You know,
I love it.
uh, I remember walking into a 3D printing class one time, and I know literally nothing about 3D printing. It's not my area of expertise at all. And I walked into the classroom one time. It was in the middle of a semester for like fourth, fifth graders and stuff. And I walk in and I'm looking at the whiteboard and he's up there. He's all enthusiastic and he's drawn. It looks like hieroglyphics to me. I'm looking at it and I'm like, what is all this? I cannot make heads or tails of it at all. I have no idea what he has up there. And my first thought was, and I had to catch myself because the first thought was, oh no, have I made a mistake? And like he's just putting stuff up there, and these kids have no idea what he's doing. But I just sat and watched. These kids knew exactly what he was doing. They understood every bit of what he had on that whiteboard. And I'm like, I'm sitting there like, carry on, do your thing. Like he got them understanding something that I looked at. It was completely foreign. I had no clue what any of it was. But these kids, these little kids, knew exactly what he was talking about because he has a passion for it and he was able to communicate it to them. That's a teacher. And
Yep.
I think that's where if we start looking at that, going towards that model for education, I think we'd see a huge difference in enthusiasm of learning for one, in the way students see themselves in the learning environment, but also I think we see a big difference in the bullying.
Mr. James, if people want to get a hold of you, where can they do that?
Best bet is go to our website. So includeEducation.com. It's the words include and education put together to form one word with only one E in the middle. includEducation.com, and you can contact us through there. Look at the different types of programs that we offer, and always hit me up on social media too. You find me on Facebook as first name Mr. James, last name does it all. Uh, and I post a lot of stuff on YouTube channel as well. Again, that's Mr. James does it all. So we can find some material there as well.
Mr. James, thank you so much for coming on my podcast.
Uh, it was a it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.